Dear students, in the last few classes, we discussed about the theories of origin of the state. We discussed the theory of origin of state of Hobbes, Locke, and also Rousseau. Uh, in the last class, we had a discussion on the comparative study of theory of origin of state, especially the theory of contract theory, social contract theory of Thomas Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau. Today, we are going to have a discussion on the evolutionary theory of the origin of the state. As you all know, that we also had a discussion on divine right theory, which says that the origin of the state is the creation of God. It was God who was responsible for the creation of state, and the king was the agent of God to rule the state. That was the belief which was propagated in ancient period and medieval period, whereby people had to obey without any resistance. That was why it was propagated. The divine right theory was propagated until the social contract theory became popular. Especially John Locke, in his two treatises of government, in the first treatise, he criticizes the divine right theory, and he sought to put aside the divine right theory, and in its place he wanted to develop social contract theory. That social contract theory was the was responsible for constitutional government, for the emergence of constitutional government. We also discussed the Rousseau's theory of social contract. uh, Today, we are going to have a discussion about evolutionary theory of origin of state. This evolutionary theory is more evidence-based and more scientific because it is based on evidence. It is based on historical facts. So we gather so many historical, events and historical factors and historical facts to arrive at broadly the evolution of state. How so many changes happened before the state that is there now has emerged. So we are going to have a discussion on the evolutionary theory of origin of state. So let us pay attention to the slides and try to understand the evolutionary theory of origin of state. Uh, right. Right. The evolutionary theory of the origin of state. Modern state is largely identified as the nation state. Here, nation implies a kind of homogeneity. State is having a boundary. Why that definite territory is that in that particular shape? Because the people living in every part of the definite territory feel that they are one, or they feel a kind of homogeneity irrespective of diversity in so many aspects. So as long as people feel homogeneity or unity, that shape remains. So that is what the word nation implies. So the modern states are nation states. The state itself was the product of the interplay of several factors, including kinship, religion, property, war, technical development, and political consciousness. These are the factors which uh, have been responsible for the birth of the state. Family. Why we are studying about family? Family is an important, one of the important factors for the emergence of state, because it was the family through which man felt some kind of attachment, obligation, and sense of order and security. So with the creation of family, he started having a feeling of sense of attachment and obligation. Savagery. When he was born, he did not have any family. He used to roam wherever he wanted, wherever he, for the sake of food and shelter. He did not have permanent shelter. Where if he goes on, and wherever he finds food, he takes the food and water, and he sleeps wherever he finds a convenient place like cave or under the tree. So the savagery of human being was savagery earlier. That means he did not have any family or any sense of attachment, and no, he had no settled life. Matrilineal and patrilineal descent. The family in the beginning, it was mother's descent that decided the structure of the family and stability of the family. So through mother, descent happened, and it was matrilineal earlier, and later on patrilineal descent came, and the matrilineal descent had given way to patrilineal descent. Here patrilineal means through father, the lineage is through father. Here matrilineal means the lineage is through mother. Earlier the family had matrilineal orientation, that the lineage was through mother, and it was mother who was center of the family. It was mother who was the main originator of the family. And but later on, this matrilineal setup was had given way to patrilineal descent. So that is how man became the center of family, and it was through man that lineage was established, and now still it is being continued almost throughout the world. uh, then emergence of state. The factors for the emergence of state: family, as I said, provided a kind of sense of attachment and also a kind of obligation, a duty towards his close fellow human beings. And kinship is a blood relationship. Kinship here, blood relationship. It provided a strong tie to live together. The few families having close blood relationship, close kinship, uh, um, had to settle in one place, and it was the guiding guiding factor, which mm, led to the combined settlement in one particular area. The but throughout the world, or throughout the period, throughout the history, we find a kind of uniform pattern that emerged. It was having the relations of domination and subordination, uh, and the domination and subordination was the center around which customs and traditions were established to protect this authority or domination and subordination. Through customs and traditions, people expressed the subordination, and people had a kind of admiration towards authority, towards domination. So the domination and subordination were well knit into the customs and traditions. So these customs and traditions protected domination and subordination, which led to a kind of political organization. uh, Forms of state in the course of its historical evolution, how state evolved. These are the major these are the major trends we find in the evolution of the emergence of state, evolution of origin of state. Tribal state, the Oriental Empire, Greek city-state. We heard so many, we heard so much about Greek city-state, especially in political science. Roman world empire, the feudal state, and modern nation state. These were the broad trends we find in history in different parts of the world, which led to the origin of state, which led to the, which led to the, which culminated in the formation of state. Tribal state. The earliest form of tribal organization of authority, command, and obedience is described as tribal state. Some of them were nomadic and others were permanently settled. So tribes did not, most of the time, did not have permanent settlement. They had a kind of unity. Some people had authority, and others obeyed the authority, and there used to be a tribal council to advise the man who used to exercise command. That kind of command and obedience existed in tribal settlements, especially if we take the example of Aborigines of Australia, the tribes of Western Hemisphere, that is in America, Northern and Southern America, before the arrival of the Europeans. Europeans came and settled. Before that settlement, there used to be tribes, and among the tribes, a system of command and obedience existed, even though it was not a kind of state, but it was near to the state. uh, so that was how the command and obedience system prevailed in tribal state, which was the beginning of the path towards the establishment of state. Then the Oriental empires, the inhabitants of the valleys of Nile and Euphrates, the Ganges, the Yellow River, and the Yangtze were bound together into the empires of Egypt, Babylon, Assyria, India, and China. These were some of the eastern part of the globe where people settled near the rivers, and they created wealth through agriculture and trade. That wealth accumulated led to the birth of cities. So many cities arose in these ancient kingdoms or ancient empires, in Egypt, Babylon, Syria, India, China. These were there were a lot of civilization took place on the banks of the seas and on the banks of the rivers. So the most of the earlier settlements were in the on the banks of the ocean or rivers. Most of the time it was rivers where a lot of civilization took place. Many cities came into existence, and a lot of wealth was created. So that was how the Oriental empires were established in the world. And then such areas attracted the places near the banks of the rivers, attracted surrounding people belonging to different kinship groups. So the kinship, close blood relatives lived together, and they had an ambition to settle in the coastal areas, in the on the banks of the rivers, and many kinship groups fought among themselves. They competed. Conflicts and intermingling eventually resulted in the creation of the state. A permanent settlement took place on the banks of the rivers after a lot of fight and conflict, and the winners became masters, rulers, and the losers in the war became the slaves, or a kind of people who were in a suppressed condition. uh, this was how state came into existence. Greek city-state. So apart from these Oriental empires, we find the earliest settlements in Greek city-state. The peculiar location of Greece helped in the evolution of new form of political organization in the ancient days. The mountains and the sea divided this area into numerous valleys and islands. That is why we find many Greek city-states. Each city-state was having its own system of ruling, is having own system of political organization, and they ruled themselves. Um, The small size of the state provided for closer relations between the government and the people. Quite naturally, they evolved their political organization into city-state. So in political science, the emergence of political science itself traces its origin to Greek city-state. Greek city-state in Greek language was known as polis, Polis, polis. So the study of polis has become political science. That is how our discipline, political science, is, and its origin is closely related to Greek city-state because of great philosophers like Plato and Aristotle. Roman world empire. After the downfall of the Greek city-state, the main line of political development passed westwards to Rome. Earlier, the European continent, the Greek city was on the east side, and it moved towards west and came to the center of the Europe, where Rome, became the cradle of civilization. Uh, the various settlements on the neighboring hills were soon united with Rome by conquest or by federation. So many nearby settlements uh, united at Rome, either because of conquest or by federation. The process of conquest eventually resulted in the formation of empire. So, for the sake of reconciliation of various groups, various kinship groups, there were arrived at many agreements, and systematic law was evolved, and the Roman law became so popular throughout the world. So the law was a kind of reconciliation, a kind of rules and regulations which were the result of lot of reconciliation of among reconciliation among many kinship groups who settle at the Rome. The feudal state. After the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, central authority was eroded. So there used to be empires, a lot of big empires. In the medieval age, which began in the 5th century, um, um, 5th century AD, powers began to be exercised by feudal chiefs, the landlords holding big, big estates. Sorry, it is not bit here, it's big estates. So the central power that was there with the king was shared by many feudal chiefs. Here, feudal chiefs mean the landlords holding big estates, and they used to exercise a lot of authority, and they used to hold huge estates where peasants used to work on the mercy of these landlords, and there the social structure was hierarchical, and where the feudal lord was enjoying all the privileges, and his duty was to make the peasants work on the fields and collect the taxes, and used to live in luxury. Uh, with the erosion of the authority of kings, the Christian church emerged as another symbol of authority. In place of king, it was the Christian church which provided a kind of identity to the people, and the Pope emerged as the head of the Holy Roman Empire. So the instead of king, it was Holy Roman Pope who became the center of authority, uh, and all the feudal lords used to pay respect towards Pope. Uh, so that was how the feudalism ruled during medieval age, and during medieval age the religion dominated the affairs of human beings, and it was religious head who used to dictate terms to the king and also to the people, and individual has no importance, and also rational belief had no place when church ruled the medieval age. People used to blindly follow the dictates of the pope, and they could never question the pope. That was how it was known as dark age. uh, so by the beginning of the 14th century till 13th century, that was the situation. Feudalism and church dominated the lives of the people. Uh, by the beginning of the 14th century, when the popes were exercising their authority arbitrarily, so here popes misused their authority, they were living in luxury. The authority of the church was challenged, and the power of monarchy was restored. So, so when people fed up with the arbitrariness of Pope authority, they challenged the authority of the church. The power of monarchy was restored. So the main events that happened, uh, which led to the emergence of modernity and also nation state, were these are the factors. Renaissance movement that happened in Italy in late uh, 14th century. Um, religious reformation movement. Religious reformation movement. The authority of the church was questioned. There was a huge movement called Protestant movement against Catholic Church. Industrial Revolution, because of the technological development with the invention of steam engine. Industrial Revolution happened in mid 18th century. Industrial merchant class emerged. So the people who established the industries and people who involved in trade became a powerful class. They are broadly known as the industrial merchant class, and they demanded no, many concessions or exemptions from the state, from the king. Individualism, individual became important. Because of this moment, these events, the rationality became important, thinking rationally became important, and humanity, human being is important, and humanity is important, and every human being, is treated as equal, because every human being is having the capacity to think rationally, and a human being became important, and the freedom of the individual became important. If individual is given freedom, he would create so many new things, he would become so creative, and the world will see so many inventions. So because of these movements, the capacity of human being realized, and human being was given importance, and thinking rationally was also given recognition. So we could see two important declines. One is feudal decline, feudal and church both declined. In that place, monarchy came. In the monarchy, there was a strong industrial merchant class who demanded equality, who demanded exemptions from unnecessary taxes, and they demanded representation. So as without representation, there would be no taxes. That was the idea that came in the modern period, especially after the beginning of Renaissance movement. So these are the factors which led to the emergence of, which led to the birth of the state. Uh, Geographic factors, natural boundaries were established, which are necessary for the creation of the state. Ethnic factors, people united among themselves based on ethnic factors. National, and language factors, a kind of sentiment of belongingness, as a kind of sentiment of homogeneity, and the language factors. These factors grouped the feudal fragments into more and more permanent combinations, that is nations. So people having a kind of homogeneity, either based on a common shared history, shared language, shared ethnic factors, they lived, they established permanent settlements in a particular geographical area, and because of the geographical factors and natural boundaries were established, and people living in those boundaries felt that they had some commonality, the sense of common, the sense of solidarity was established. That was how nations became nations established, and nation states came into existence. Uh, the above process led to the emergence of France, Spain, England, Switzerland, Netherlands, Russia, and later Germany and Italy as nation states. That is how nation states came into existence because of so much of historical evolution. Uh, this, state, the emergence of state has happened. This separation of territories into distinct states, each with its own national spirit, destroyed the idea of common superior and paved the way for sovereign nation states. So the people living in particular area, in definite territory, were supreme. Supreme in the sense they could establish their own rule, they could establish their own law, and nobody would interfere from outside. And also, that is how many nation states were born. The process of formation of modern nation state started in Europe as early as the 16th century. They were earlier largely monarchies. However, since 18th century, there had been slow transition from absolute monarchy to constitutional monarchy and democracy. The best example was the Glorious Revolution in England. There was a civil war between Parliament and King. Parliament represented the people who were paying the taxes, and the Parliament demanded uh, that king should take decisions as per the wishes of the people, as per the decisions made in the parliament. And initially he convened the meeting of parliament. Later on he went back on his word, and people demanded to convene the parliament, and that ensured fighting between the parliament and the king. That was a huge civil war. After a lot of pressure, the England king left his throne and went away, and that was how the representatives selected prime minister, who became real executive. Again, king was brought back, who became nominal head of the state, and that was how democracy established in in England. And later on, the democratic spirit spread throughout the Europe and throughout the world, and that was how modern nation states have become democratic. So this is how nation states have come into existence. So this is the evolutionary process which resulted in the birth of the state. So we have to understand that there were so many historical factors throughout a long history that led to the emergence of nation state. So this is the process which happened in almost 2.5 centuries. So because of the evolutionary process, nation state has come into existence. Here we have to understand three different theories. Divine right theory says state come into existence because of God's will. That was one theory that was propagated earlier, and that was sought to be put aside by social contract theory. It was the people who created the state. So when people created the state, the people, or human being, became important, and their rights became important, or their will and wish became important. That was the foundation that laid the foundation of the democratic form of governments, or the constitution based governments. But this evolutionary theory is evidence based. It is based on historical factors, many historical factors, and the evolution of these historical factors led to the birth of the state. So here the evolutionary theory of state is because of the evolution of so many factors. So that is how we should understand the birth of the state. So here the three important theories have been discussed. So and go through them again and again. Thank you.